Hello, listeners. Today we are here for the third and final installment of the webinar series on RFID, brought to you by Avery Dennison and Labels and Labeling. I'm the North America editor for the magazine, and today I'm joined by Jeremy Shenoff and DJ Lee, both experts in Avery Dennison's RFID division. Today's topic, developing a successful RFID business strategy, will discuss tips on how to establish the business case for RFID, discover how to identify markets ripe for growth, establish a clear ROI, and develop products that will meet your customers' needs. Today's presentation should last about 35 minutes with time for Q&A at the end, but we would like this to be interactive, so please feel free to ask questions at any time throughout the presentation. On your computer screen, you should see a control panel, and if that's not open, click that orange arrow at the top, and that'll make the box larger. Within that box, you should see another drop-down arrow to ask questions, and again, please do so at any time. Also on your control panel under handouts, you should see a white paper from Avery Dennison on RFID strategy that's available for download. And finally, once this is concluded, you'll be able to listen again at labelsandlabeling.com, where you can also find the first and second installments of this series under the video section of the website. So let me introduce our presenters. You may remember Jeremy Shenoff from the second installment of this webinar series. As Senior Director of Global RFID Solutions, Jeremy is responsible for defining RFID growth strategy, as well as managing key partnerships to foster RFID adoption worldwide. Jeremy has a Bachelor of Arts degree in Public Policy from Brown University and has earned his Master's of Business Administration from the Ross School of Business at the University of Michigan. Today, Jeremy is joined by DJ Lee, who heads up the RFID Channel Sales Organization and is responsible for identifying new growth areas for RFID beyond apparel. Prior to assuming this role, DJ has worked across a number of divisions at Avery Dennison, from research and development to technical marketing. After graduating from the University of Illinois, DJ earned a PhD in chemical engineering from Ohio State University. Jeremy, DJ, thank you for being here today.
Thanks, Chelsea, and hello everyone. It's good to be back with this webinar. As Chelsea mentioned, this presentation is about how to develop a successful RFID strategy, understanding what opportunities make sense, how to position yourself to address them, and how to develop a customer business case that provides end users a compelling reason to adopt RFID. I'm going to try not to get too into the weeds when we talk about the business case and the ROI modeling, but instead focus on providing a framework that helps you think through how to do this for your own projects. And after we get through those materials, I'm going to hand it over to DJ, who will cover the more tangible aspects of the RFID strategy, namely what converting assets and capabilities are required. But before we get too deep into this, we'll do a quick poll here, just to get a baseline around how you would describe your RFID strategy. So I think the poll should be up, and just kind of get your perspective. Do you not convert any RFID products today? Do you convert RFID products but perhaps don't have a defined strategy? Maybe you do it opportunistically based on end customer demand, or perhaps you focus on a specific segment or maybe something else.
Okay, we'll give everyone maybe about 10 seconds more to vote before closing. Okay, so Jeremy, we have 36%. The majority said, I don't convert any RFID products today. And then the next biggest was opportunistic, based on customer demand.
Okay, good. So it sounds like this material will be relevant for those trying to think about how to frame your RFID strategy if you're getting started. So before we start, one important message I want to iterate here is that like any technology, RFID is good at some things and not good at others. And when I talk about RFID, I'm sort of using it generically, but what my real focus is going to be on UHF, ultra high frequency, or RAIN RFID. And the key to defining a successful RAIN RFID strategy is to focus on opportunities that leverage the strengths of RAIN RFID. Trying to force fit every problem into a RAIN or UHF RFID solution is not a recipe for success, and I think this is some of the challenges that if you saw the last webinar we talked about that happened early on in the technology's life cycle, where there was a solution out there. They felt it was good for one application, but it ended up not being the right fit, and ended up really stalling adoption for the technology. And that's really the point of the cartoon here. It's the old adage that when you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail, when in fact that's not the case. And so coming out of this webinar, what we want you to be able to do is to think about how you sort out the nails from the screws, from the paper clips, so you really understand what the right technology tool is to addressing the end customer problem that you're trying to work with your customers to solve. So what is UHF or RAIN RFID good at? Well, fundamentally, it's good at three applications. First is identifying what an item is. The second is identifying where that item is, so its location. And the third is authenticating that it is the right item. So is it what it's supposed to be? Say you're looking for item X and you find something, is that item X or are you finding item Y? You could potentially argue that there's a fourth box that's missing from this page that's around using UHF RFID to engage with items, but those tend to be a little more sort of customized infrastructure that's required for that, and I think it's kind of perhaps a little more of a niche business opportunity right now. So with UHF, these three applications are enabled at the item level. And that's important because it really drives UHF's ability to enable a few things. So first is to be able to read one-to-many. That is, you have one scanner in your hand or one scanner on a dock door, and it's very easily to read many items coming through that scanner. The second thing that enables these applications is no line of sight. So you could have things packed away in a box. They could be high on a shelf. You don't necessarily need to see something to scan it. And the third is that it's cost effective. So these three things combined enable you to identify, locate, authenticate, and perhaps also engage with things at an item level. And so when you think about projects that leverage the attributes of UHF or RAIN RFID, the ones that I think do really well and that sit in the sweet spot of the technology are the ones that kind of are driven by at least one and perhaps all three of these different attributes. And so the more of these attributes you can leverage, the better fit for RFID your project is going to be. So when you put these things together, what are some of the common attributes of projects that lend themselves to RFID solutions? What are those that fit in that sweet spot I just spoke about? So the first is having items that there are either many of them or they're complex to manage. So for example, you could have an item that has a lot of different SKUs or a whole bunch of things that need to be counted very quickly. So think about that kind of the bag tag on the left there. If you think about bags moving by a conveyor belt, they're all effectively unique. They're all different bags assigned to different passengers, and they're moving very quickly down a conveyor belt. So you need to be able to quickly count them and identify what they are. The second attribute is line of sight challenges. So things that are either packaged in a box, stacked up, hard to see, you can't reach them easily. The third is the items are valuable enough to warrant an RFID tag. So there obviously is a cost to putting an RFID tag on something, and fundamentally the item that you're tagging needs to have enough value to kind of drive a business case around the incremental cost of applying a tag. If it's something that is effectively something that's free or just like a piece of paper that doesn't have any intrinsic value, it's probably not worth putting an RFID tag on it. And then the last point here goes back to my comment around location. And so from a location perspective, the opportunity is really about knowing if something is there, then tracking where it is. So I'm supposed to have items A, B, C, D in my inventory, and I want to check to see if they're there. That's a great application for a UHF or RAIN RFID. But what is not a great application is I have a container that's on a ship, and then that container is going on a truck, and I want to be able to see that container move off the truck and off the ship and onto the truck and down the highway in real time. I often have people ask me about that type of use case, and I think that's more of a GPS application. It's not a great fit for UHF RFID. So now we're going to turn into kind of the RFID analysis, and kind of as we go into this, you can kind of think about that last page I said as almost a checklist. So as you think about opportunities, you can go through that list and say, okay, does it meet these criteria? And if it does, it's probably a good project for UHF RFID. But let's kind of start on this ROI analysis piece. So we'll do a quick poll just to, again, gauge everyone's baseline understanding. So how familiar are you with RFID analysis? You can spell ROI. Perhaps you know what ROI means. Maybe you know enough to be dangerous. I probably fit in that category. Or you're a CFA and basically you do your household budgeting using cash flow analysis. So where does everyone fall?
Okay, let's give them a few more seconds. The votes are rolling in. Okay, Jeremy, majority said, more than half said they know what ROI means. There's quite a few that know enough to be dangerous as well.
Okay, good. So hopefully we'll maybe able to make you a little less dangerous coming out of this. So the key for any application, before we get into kind of the mechanics of it, is to start with a business problem. Before you open up a spreadsheet, before you start scoping a technology solution, start with the end customer's business problem. What is the pain point that you're trying to address, and that pain point will typically have some excuse me, financial or operational implications or metrics that are associated with it. And that's important because if you can't quantify the problem, it could be very difficult to ask for funding to solve it. All these solutions require some level of investment on the part of the customer, and if you can't quantify the value of the problem, it's hard to justify the value of the investment. So once you identify a problem, you can identify use cases around a solution, and that involves looking at the actions, the events, the system flows that are needed to solve the problem. Once you have that, you can start thinking about the actual technology that's required for the solution. So you can think about the scope of the requirements. Once you have the requirements, you can start looking at the cost of investments, and then you can pull that together all together to develop an ROI. And the important thing here is to swim left to right. Starting with the technology is sort of akin to swimming upstream, and it's almost goes back to that initial diagram of having the hammer and looking for a nail. And it's unfortunately something that I think a lot of technology firms try to do. They basically say, hey, I got this great technology, let's go find some problems that we can solve with it, and they try to kind of force fit customer problems into their solution. That's usually not a great recipe for success. So as you look at different customer segments across different industry verticals, you'll find that as you look at these different opportunities, that different segments are faced with different challenges. And what is a problem in one industry may or may not be a problem for another industry segment. And so this slide is illustrative and is meant to have some examples. But so on the left-hand side, you see different vertical segments, and on the right-hand side, across the top, you see different use cases. So there's retail, healthcare, aviation, and then the different use cases include inventory tracking or asset tracking, inventory visibility, lower scrap, labor productivity, and there are often times when a lot of industries share a use case or ROI driver, such as labor productivity is often a common thing across different segments. But there are some that are different. For example, lowering scrap is something that's unique to manufacturing, or sometimes some verticals have their own specific use cases, like healthcare has some that are unique that don't necessarily involve, that aren't necessarily applying to other verticals. So it's important to understand these differences and kind of, as I mentioned earlier, not try to force fit a business case from one segment into another. So if you think about it, for example, if you go back to that picture of the baggage tag, what an airline is trying to solve through tracking baggage could be very different than what a hospital is trying to solve by tracking, a $10,000 stent in their supply cabinet. So it's just important to understand how these different use cases align to different ROI drivers across industries.
Now, Jeremy, we have a question from the audience before we move on. This listener is wondering if there's any experience in traffic solutions, like windshield RFIDs of a car.
Yep, that certainly is a common application. There are a couple. So I'd say windshield RFID is I'll call that sort of a technology application. There are a few different use cases that are enabled by that. So probably the two that come to mind right away is one, tolling. So if you think about kind of those those automated tolling applications where you can kind of drive right through, sort of an equivalent of an Easy Pass here in the U.S. That's one RFID application, and I think more and more we're seeing sort of passive UHF solutions in that space. The other one is around vehicle identification, so sort of building a VIN number or a vehicle registration number into a UHF tag, so people can ensure that vehicles driving down the road have the proper registration associated with them. So those are definitely applications that are out there. I wouldn't say they're ones that are the most common, but there certainly are a few case studies that one can track down on it.
Okay, interesting. Thank you.
Right. Okay, so it's important to kind of digging into this a little more. It's important to define the use case, because the use case is going to dictate what the technology solution is. So the use case will have a number of different attributes. It could be around the item characteristics. So what exactly are you trying to apply the tag to? Is it large? Is it small? Is it metal? Is it plastic? Is it paper? There's the environmental characteristics. Does it sit on a metal shelf? Is it stacked amongst densely stacked amongst a bunch of other items, or is it hanging somewhere? There's the data management requirements. So what actual data needs to be written to the tag? How will it be written? Is it written kind of in a centralized place, or is it written in a distributed kind of in multiple distributed fashion? Again, kind of the contrast here is in the retail space, data is written to the tags in factories in Asia, whereas in baggage tagging, data is written to the tags on the fly as you check in an airport. And then there's how the tags are read. Are they going to be read via handheld scanner? Are they going to be read via a dock door as pallets come into a distribution center? Are they going to be on a conveyor belt or some other fashion? And then there's probably other factors as well you might consider. But I think this list is a good starting point. And so the use case attributes basically define or dictate the technology solution, because the item characteristics will define what type of inlay, or actually I say the item and environmental characteristics define the inlay and tag media requirements. So you need a tag that specifically works for on metal. You need a tag with more memory. Going back to your windshield example, that will require specific media requirements to make sure it can withstand winter conditions, water, etc. The data management will define the printing and encoding solutions, and how the tags are read will define the reading infrastructure, and the reading infrastructure can also in turn inform the tag requirements. So some readers require tags of a certain size or a certain sensitivity. So all these things are important to consider as you define the solution. And as you think about all those things, there's going to be cost and performance trade-offs, and those impact your ROI. Obviously, as your cost flex up or down, that will either improve or make your ROI worse, and there's trade-offs to performance, because if your performance goes up or down, your read rates go up or down, that could impact your ROI as well, because you're not necessarily capturing all the benefits if you have a lower performing solution. So it's important to kind of look at this as almost a dynamic system, and you want to kind of try to optimize all the variables at the same time, which is challenging, but basically what it means is it ends up being an iterative process as you go through it. So now we'll get into the business case framework. And again, I'm focusing a lot here on looking at the business case from an end customer framework perspective. As we go through this, I think this framework also applies to developing your own internal RFID business case. But you kind of replace some of the different drivers with your own internal drivers. But the reason why we're taking the customer lens here is because, frankly, I think it's often neglected. And I think going back to some of what I said earlier, a lot of us assume because we have a technology that there is a compelling reason to adopt that technology from an end customer perspective. But a customer is basically looking at, okay, I'm going to invest incremental money in this versus what I'm spending today often. What is the payback? What is the return I'm going to get on that investment? So that's why we think it's really important to look at RFID through the lens of the end customer and what benefit and investment they need to make. So fundamentally, when you think about ROI, you can break it down into three buckets. And we're going to talk about each of these in a little more detail going forward. The first is the revenue that a customer may get. So if a customer deploys RFID, will they be able to increase their revenue? The second is their operating cost. So perhaps they're deploying the solution to reduce operating costs. We talked about labor productivity and reducing scrap. Those are all operating cost benefits, but there are also going to be some incremental operating costs that we need to consider as part of the RFID solution. And then the last part of it is the incremental capital expense, or CapEx. So this is really the upfront investment that a customer needs to make to deploy RFID. So that's the basic business case structure. And now we'll step through the revenue, operating cost, and CapEx buckets. But before we do that, I've talked about ROI generically, or return on investment, but really it's a little bit of an umbrella term that encompasses a number of different metrics. And so I'll talk a little about what some of those other metrics are. The first one is payback, which basically refers to the length of time that it takes to recover the cost of an investment. So let's say I need to invest $100 in some solution. The payback tells me how long it takes me to get that $100 back. The second one I'll skip over IRR and go to NPV, which stands for net present value. This is effectively the difference of the present value of the cash that you invest in the solution, so your cash outflow, and the benefit that you get from that solution, which is the cash inflow. And NPV measures the absolute profitability of the project in dollars or euros. So effectively, if the NPV is greater than 0, the project will be a positive impact on your profitability. And then IRR is very much related to NPV, but you can think about it as the rate of growth that a project is expected to generate. And IRR is good for comparing the returns across multiple projects. So let's say you have a customer and they want to invest in 2 different RFID projects, and one has an IRR of 30 and the one has an IRR of 20. The one with the IRR of 30 will be the better project. And the last one is simple ROI. And this is often, I think, where people start, but I think, frankly, it's the one that it's good because it's easy to compute. It basically just sort of looks at your costs, your benefits minus your costs over your costs. So it's sort of the efficiency of your benefits. The challenge is that it doesn't factor in the timing of those benefits at all. So let's say I invest $10 today in 2 projects, and in project 1 I get $20 tomorrow, and in project 2 I get $20 in 10 years from now. ROI effectively treats those projects the same from a benefit standpoint, but in reality, I'd much rather get the $20 tomorrow than wait 10 years from it, because I could have done something else with that money in the time being. But ROI doesn't sort of tell me that one is better than the other. So that's an overview of the metrics, and then once you have those metrics, you can map those to specific KPIs that will impact the ROI. So it could be around sales lift, it could be around labor productivity, it could be around lower inventory. And those are really going to be the levers that will move the financial analysis for your end customer.
Jeremy, we have another question. Sorry to interrupt before you go on. I think it's a good question. One of our listeners is wondering, is it possible to track with RFID the product from producer facilities to retail?
Yes, it certainly is, and that does happen across different use cases today. So typically the way that works is it'll be tracked using some sort of conveyor system, or perhaps a dock door system, or a read chamber. They could track it, leaving the manufacturing facility to ensure that they're shipping out all the right products, and even generate an advanced shipment notice to the distribution center or the retailer. Then they could check it going into receiving in the DC. If they do any cross docking or breaking up the shipment, they could then validate it going out of the DC and the retailer. Retailer can validate it from a receiving perspective to make sure that they're getting what they're supposed to be getting. And again, they could do that via sort of automated fashion, via portals, or they could use handheld readers to do that. And then once it's on the shop floor, they could then read it to make sure they have the accurate stuff on their sales floor.
Great, thank you.
All right. So let's talk about the revenue impact. So there's fundamentally 3 levers that can impact revenue. The first is price. So this means, let's say you're implementing RFID in a product. Perhaps your customer can charge more for that product. So an example here is, Michelin was looking at deploying RFID in some of their commercial tires to add more value-added services to those tires. So that's an example where they're improving their pricing because they're RFID enabling their product. The second revenue driver is around volume. So can they sell more products because they can get better throughput or improved inventory visibility? And I think sort of a great example of this is what Macy's is doing in the retail space. They know their inventory, they get better visibility on the floor, therefore they can sell more products. And then the third revenue driver is around introducing new products or new solutions. So KitCheck is an example of a company in the healthcare space where they basically, their whole product is enabled by RFID. It's a way to scan hospital medications for emergency rooms, and RFID basically enabled them to launch that solution. So that's an overview of the different revenue impacts that RFID could enable for end customers. Now we'll talk a little bit about the cost impacts. So the first is the product cost of goods sold. And so this applies that for any time that you're increasing sales, there is a cost associated with that. So again, going to the Macy's example, if you're going to be selling more products, you need to account for the cost of purchasing that incremental product. So let's say Macy's is going to sell more jeans. They need to buy more jeans from, say Levi's or whoever, and there's a cost of doing that. So they need to account for that in their business case. The second cost is the run rate OpEx. So this could be around business processes that are impacted by the solution. So for example, if your labor productivity improves through implementing RFID, that could be a beneficial run rate OpEx. It could decrease your OpEx. And so this could be something that someone like Kumho Tire is seeing, is improving their internal processes by using RFID. And then the last piece is the OpEx around the solution. So the solution is going to have some cost, the cost of the tags, the cost of the hardware software maintenance. This is sort of inherent in all projects and something that you obviously need to consider as you build out a customer business case. And the last piece here is the capital expense. And this is kind of pretty basic. It's the hardware, so it's the RFID readers that you need, the printers, any additional servers or networking software. It's the RFID software. So the middleware or any application software that's required, and then the services. So if you need to do any system integration, project management, and training. And often we hear about, well, how do sort of OpEx or software as a service models impact the ROI? And fundamentally, what it does is it impacts the ROI through timing. A lot of times the cost doesn't necessarily go down because you still need the hardware. It's not like you could have a remote server somewhere. You need to have the readers on site. But having an OpEx model basically allows you to defer some of those costs and improve the payback of the solution. Okay, so kind of wrapping up this section of the business case, I want to have a few caveats here. So first of all, not every business case is financially driven, particularly in a space like healthcare. A lot of it has to do with patient outcomes. So for example, reducing infection rates could be a key metric for an RFID business case in healthcare that's very difficult to quantify, but could be an important driver. And so again, it's just important to understand with end customers, what are the specifics that they're trying to get to, and tailor the solution and the use case and the business case around that outcome. The second call out here is that it's typically better to have one use case or KPI drive the ROI than multiple ones. It's not necessarily prohibitive to have multiple ones. I mean, it's good at the end of the day, but if you want to have one be the lead and the others be supportive. And the reason for that is because if you have the business case spread across too many benefits, that often means a lot of stakeholders have their hands in it, and it's harder to get alignment and buy-in, and things impact multiple people's budget, and everyone needs to sign off on the business case, and it typically just makes the sell cycle harder. The last piece is that even if you don't need to build a business case for your customers and don't need to necessarily do a spreadsheet for them, it helps to understand what that business case is, because you kind of get in your customer's mindset and understand what are the key things they're thinking about that will drive adoption for them. What are the factors that will make or break it for them? And I think it just helps talk to them in their language and speak to them in a way that will facilitate adoption of the technology. So to summarize here, it's important to focus on a problem that UHF or RAIN RFID can solve. They can't do everything, as I said before, and so it's critical to look at what the technology can do and focus on the problems where it's best leveraged. It's important to dissect the business case into the core elements and break those elements down and define the KPIs that impact those elements and that drive the ROI. And once you've done this on paper, that's really only the first step. It's critical to get out in the field and if either your customer does it or you do it, but validate that via a pilot. I mean, it's easy. A lot of times business cases look really good on paper, and that's why it's important to say, okay, how do we actually test this in a controlled manner such that we can actually validate the hypothesis that we're putting forth. And again, the perspective that I've taken here is really from a customer perspective, but the framework can be applied to internal investments as well. You just need to look at the cost that you would incur and the incremental revenues that you would drive. And DJ's going to talk about those, particularly from kind of an asset and capability perspective. But I think from a customer perspective, it's often overlooked from someone providing a technology solution to think about it from the lens of what is the benefit that they're going to drive. But to enable that, there are going to be some requirements on your part, and there's going to be capabilities and platforms that you'll need to enable to do this. And so with that, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague DJ to talk about RFID platform and conversion capabilities. So DJ, over to you.
Can everybody hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Excellent. I'm going to enable my screen here. Is my screen on?
It is, yep.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Jeremy, and thanks, Chelsea. Before I start this part of the presentation, I want to make sure everybody is not shying about sending in questions. I love to be interrupted during my presentation. So if you have any questions throughout my slides, please do send in questions to Chelsea or myself. Okay. So throughout our webinar series, you guys now have a better understanding of the RFID technology and also the market. Now you have ability to identify your business case and business strategy. Hopefully you're getting a lot more questions from your customers in terms of RFID solutions. And more importantly, you really believe that RFID is the right fit for your product offering today. So the remaining question is that I'm going to cover in a few slides here. The remaining question is, how do you manufacture or how do you customize the RFID product as a label converter or packaging companies that you guys manage? So before I show you some of these options, I'd like to ask you one quick question. So Chelsea, if you can go to the poll real quick.
Yeah.
So what I want to ask you is, if you're currently converting RFID products today within your company, so some of the options that I put in there is you've been doing this for more than 2 years. You just started less than 2 years ago, and you're not doing any converting today, but you will be doing soon because of it's driven by your customers or business strategy you have, or you have no intention of doing RFID converting anytime soon.
Okay, we'll give everyone a few seconds to vote. They're still rolling in. All right. So it looks like there's a pretty good majority here, DJ, that are not converting yet, but will be soon. And then there's kind of a mix. There's about 23% here have said they are doing it for more than 2 years.
Okay, fantastic. That's a perfect the answer that I was kind of hoping for. So this will be a pretty beneficial for a lot of those guys who are thinking about getting into converter or been doing converting for the last couple of years. So the couple topics that I want to talk about today, the first part is the raw material from the RFID inlay standpoint. Obviously I'm not going to talk about label materials. That's what you guys do very well in terms of finding the specs, meeting the customer requirements and all of that. So in addition to the typical, label and tags converting process, I want to talk about the raw materials for the inlay specifically here. And the second part, I will talk a little bit more in terms of the converting processes for inserting or converting RFID products. Okay. And just a couple bullet points there. I'm going to walk you guys through what these definitions are, but sometimes the inlay is called transponder as well. So the inlay or PS inlay or wet inlay, that is basically the functional part of the RFID product that we manufacture as an inlay manufacturer. So first, dry inlays, sometimes it's called inlay or transponders. George, actually, in the first webinar, we talked about some of the components going into RFID products. So a dry inlay is the very basic, the RFID transponder itself. So typically, it's built on a carrier. Most commonly, it's on clear PET, a polyester film. And sometimes the inlay manufacturer has their own capability to do the antenna, or sometimes they outsource that. But you build the antenna on top of the polyester carrier, and you attach the chip. And now you have a functioning RFID product or functioning RFID inlays. Often, some inlay manufacturers, like Avery Dennison, we over-laminate the whole construction to improve the durability against the mechanical abuse, or as well as the ESD, the electrostatic charge. So, those are just the typical, different formats of dry inlays. And obviously, in terms of how the antenna looks like, the formats and all that is driven by customer requirements. Okay, so far no questions, so I'm going to just go to the next slide.
Yeah,
the next
there's
slide
a few
is
questions rolling in, but we'll save them for the end because I want to make sure we get through some of this information. But there's a few coming in.
Okay,
actually,
so next slide, just want to give you a very high-level snapshot of wet inlay or pressure-sensitive inlays. So if you think about dry inlay, which is just one layer of film carrier with antenna and chip attached to it, you take that material and you laminate transfer tape, or pressure-sensitive transfer tape, with the liner, and you die cut right around the antenna. It basically becomes a very, very simple label. We call that wet inlays or pressure-sensitive inlays. The reason that inlay manufacturers are offering this is because of the processing issues on the converting end downstream. So I'm going to talk about that in the next section. So once again, this is a very straightforward process, taking the dry inlay, laminating transfer tape, die cut to make wet inlays or pressure-sensitive inlays. Okay.
And DJ, I want to stop you for 1 second because we do have a question that I think relates to this. Someone is wondering, are the dry inlays, are those flexible?
Dry inlay as well as wet inlay is very flexible. So typical carrier for dry inlay is 2 mil PET, polyester. Avery Dennison, we do offer some different type of substrates, which is the next slide that I'm going to talk about. But most of these products that we do are very flexible materials. So, and 95% of the time, the passive UHF market as well as the HF market is a roll-to-roll process in terms of inlay manufacturing as well as the converting. Okay, so for both of these dry and wet inlays, ultimately what's going to happen downstream by the label converters or folks like you is going to be inserted into finished labels or finished product. So I'm going to talk about that. But before I go into the processing side of it, there's a third option, which we call it smart face inlay. So from the principle of the product itself, it's exactly as what I described the dry inlay for. So smart face inlay is exactly the same as dry inlay. The only difference is it gives us some flexibility in terms of customizing the substrate as well as the layout relatively easily. So Avery Dennison has a very unique processing patterns around strap attach process, which enable us to offer smart face solution in the market. So if you think about, taking the inlay itself and then just doing very simple lamination and die cut, you basically have a finished product. So in terms of, giving you the benefit of, from the processing standpoint, something like this could be a great advantage in improving your, the converting process efficiencies. Okay, this is a little bit different concept, but I'm gonna explain a little bit better in the next slide, which is more on the processing standpoint. So if there's no question around the product itself, Chelsea, I'm gonna go to the next slide.
No, yeah, you can go ahead.
All right, great. So imagine the way we are producing wet inlays. So we're taking dry inlays and we're doing lamination and die cut to make wet inlays. Exactly the same principle applies to a SmartFace inlays. So if you can imagine SmartFace, which is already laid out for your finished product specification, what you need to do is you laminate transfer tape, or in case you need to customize the face stock as well. I mean, you could laminate on other top and bottom, depending on what your customer's requirement is. But if you laminate and then die cut, it becomes an RFID product at the end with a very relatively simpler processing requirements. So if you have a servo-driven press today on your shop, you can do this potentially today. So you could take customized inlays from Avery Dennison, and you can laminate transfer tape or the face stock, depending on what your requirements are, and go through the servo control press, and you could produce RFID products today. If you don't have a servo control press, there is an option that you could actually have a wet tensioning system on your press to be able to run the very similar process, which can be a much cost-effective option. But obviously, that needs to be worked out in terms of the press manufacturer or some of the know-how that you guys have at your factory. Okay. So once again, I mean, this is if you can imagine, if you're in the market for DI labels or very small number of SKUs that you don't require to have a lot of the customization in terms of the label and the face stock, this could be a really powerful method in terms of getting into RFID products. Okay. And the next slide, I'm going to show you more traditional insertion process. So the insertion process is basically you're taking label stocks, you're delaminating the face stock from the liner, and at that point you're inserting RFID inlays, and you're relaminating and die cut. So the diagram that you're looking at basically shows that exact process. So in the upstream, I mean, obviously you could do the printing, you could do a lot of the label converting that your customer is requiring you to do. But in the middle portion, that's basically the brain of the RFID insertion process. So you have an inlay. In this case, we're showing the 2-lane insertion. So the 2 lanes of RFID inlays are coming in. The cutting mechanism, it singulates the RFID inlay and transfer over to the face stock or the liner, but typically a face stock in this scenario. And then it gets relaminated. Obviously, it has to be register when you're relaminating those face stocks for the liner, and then you're die cutting downstream. Okay. And the next slide is. Oh,
sorry. We have a quick question here. Can these be used in digital label machines as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, in terms of how you're incorporating the insertion mechanism within your press, it's just a matter of, how creative you could get. So I'm going to talk about some of the options that, available today from the equipment manufacturers. But you can work with press manufacturers or equipment manufacturers for, to customize your presses. So it's just a matter of, how do you handle the web coming in? And how do you register? And of course, there's a lot of requirements that you have to satisfy from the finished product standpoint. But yes, definitely, the digital press is one of the options that we have seen.
Okay, good. We had quite a few questions on that.
All right. So the next slide is on the wet inlay insertion. So exactly the same process as we discussed for the dry inlay, except for the vacuum drum and the cutting mechanism to transfer the inlay from the inlay roll to the face stock. Now you're just simply using label applicators. So, you delaminating the face stock, from the liner. You're inserting wet inlays by using label applicator and relaminating and die cut. Okay. I mean, I am simplifying quite a bit in terms of what the insertion process will look like, but there are a lot of different options out there. But from the fundamental standpoint, that's basically what has to be done in terms of customizing the RFID product. Okay.
We did have a question about die cutting the antenna. I don't know if you wanted to spend a minute maybe talking about how that process works.
Okay, so when I say die cutting, I'm not talking about die cutting antennas. The antenna is coming from inlay manufacturers. So, there are a lot of different antenna manufacturing processes. But from the converting standpoint, you're not die cutting the antennas. I'm only, talking about die cutting the labels. So you're, die cutting around the RFID inlays to make the finished product. Okay.
Thank you. Yes, thank you.
And the third option, which is fairly unique. I do not see this option very often in the marketplace, but we believe this is another way of enabling relatively easily, to be able to handle wet inlay product throughout your press. So the only difference here is now we're not dealing with delamination and relamination of the face stock to the liner. So you're basically introducing a fresh web of liner, and you're applying wet inlays onto either liner or the face stock or the base material, and then you're laminating and die cutting downstream. So one of the advantages that you'll see in this scenario is you could actually do this without per se label applicator. You could actually do this on your press with a simple peel plate arrangement to dispense RFID inlays. And also you could potentially do this in multiple lane configurations because of that. Okay. Mm-hmm. So if you don't have any questions, I'm going to go to the next slide.
Yeah, I think we can move on.
Okay, so the next slide, I just want to give you a few names who are actively involved in RFID converting the equipment. So there are some names that you should definitely talk to, if not all of them, you've got to talk to a few of these guys in terms of what are some of the commercially available RFID equipments are out there today. Once again, I showed you a few options in terms of, how the RFID converting is being done today. A lot of these guys are offering different options. So, most of these guys do have both dry as well as wet inlay insertion capabilities. Some of them only have wet inlay capability or dry inlay. And also from the costing standpoint, there is a huge variability in terms of, what are some of the options that you're looking for. So from the investment standpoint, that's going to vary quite a bit. So I encourage you guys, if of course, if you're interested in getting into RFID, I encourage you to talk to some of these folks. And we could help you get to the right contact. We do work very closely with all of these guys. So, if you need our support in terms of finding the right folks, we can definitely help you with that. And the next slide, which is kind of my last slide in terms of, talking about RFID converting and handling. There's three key takeaways that I want to make sure that, you pay attention to. Outside of the label converting business, you guys are the expert in label converting, how to do QAs, how to match the printing, how to match the colors and all of that, die cutting qualities and all that. But besides all of those, labeling and tagging, the tag converting issues, some of the new challenges that you have to face because of handling RFID product. The first one is mechanical control. So for example, now you're dealing with, of course, our carrier, the inlay carrier is 2 mil film or paper thickness, but the chip itself, the IC itself, is relatively thick. So if you're strictly looking at the area where the chip is sitting, you're looking at the thickness of 10 mil. In some cases, if it's a thicker chip, you're talking 12, 13 mil type of thickness. So for example, if you have a mag die that you're die cutting labels with, has a very shallow cavity, you have a risk of start crushing those chips. So you definitely have to watch out, what some of the toolings that you have. Make sure you're not putting too much pressure on the nib rolls as well as on the die station and things. And of course, you have to pay attention to the roll and web tension throughout your processes. The second item is ESD, electrostatic discharge. So most of you guys are probably controlling ESD on your press day to day for different reasons. But with the RFID product, the ESD can potentially damage the chip. So, we highly recommend to have tinsels, as simple as tinsels, but ionizing bars and blowers throughout your press, especially where you're handling or unwinding the inlay, the product. And the third, which is probably the most important thing, is RF control. So, the RFID product is the electronic device. It's no longer just a, cosmetic type of labels anymore. So you have to make sure the RFID product, RFID chip, is not being damaged throughout your processes. So there are a lot of different options out there in terms of having inline tester in your press, but not only inline tester, but also you have to have, looking at offline QA processes to make sure you have the proper RF control. And once again, all of these points that I'm making, we could support you. We can, work with you in terms of what are some of the watch outs and what are some of the key, the process issues that you're gonna face. So, Chelsea, any questions so far before I go to my last slide, which is kind of outside of RFID converting?
Yeah, we have quite a few questions. If you're ready to jump into the Q&A.
Let's just cover the last slide. Actually, the last slide is my. I think we haven't done any commercial breaks, so I feel responsible to have one slide that is on Avery Dennison. So I've been in RFID since 2001. There has been a lot of ups and downs, as some of you guys probably know. But most recent years, technology has been matured, and as well as the market. Market has been very mature. One of the thing that I always tell folks who are involved in this market, as well as who are thinking about getting into RFID. One of the key factors to be successful in this market is having the right network of partners. Obviously we are sponsoring the webinar because of that reason. But Avery Dennison has been the largest UHF RFID inlay provider globally. We've been working with many different label converters, system integrators, as well as the end customers, trying to enable the market with RFID products. Obviously the challenge for us and you are going to be finding that right type of market, right type of verticals, as Jeremy talked about earlier. We do have very different approach than a lot of other folks in this market from the inlay manufacturing standpoint. We try to be more innovative in terms of how we are building the product that potentially can benefit your processes downstream. So it is very important to work with you early on to better tune or fine tune the processes from our side as well as yours to enable more end customers down the road. So with that, please do let us know how we can support you guys. And that is end of my slide. And if there's any questions, we could entertain some of those.
Yeah, there's loads of questions, and we've already kind of gone over, so I'm going to just try to get to these, as many of these as we can. Someone is wondering, what is the smallest size of an RFID inlay?
So the inlay size varies quite a bit. I don't know top of my head what's the smallest product we have. I'm guessing probably 1/2 inch in diameter is the smallest size we have. But we could get you more information in terms of what our product portfolio looks like today. So the largest size I could probably I can think of is for the aviation product, which is close to 4x2 inch size. The smallest product we have is probably 1/2 inch by 1/2 inch.
Okay. And then you mentioned a thickness of 13 mil. Did you mean 13 millimeters?
No, 13. So 13. It's finding a blank here. So 1/1000th of an inch.
Okay. Yeah, this person said that sounds really thick, so I think they just wanted clarification.
No.
Okay.
13 mil equivalents in terms of SI units. So 500 maybe 600 microns or so.
Okay. And then this person's wondering what other kinds of face stocks can be used other than PET.
Yeah, so in general market, the PET is most commonly used carrier for RFID inlays. Because of our unique capability in the SmartFace technology, we could do BOPP, the polypropylene, as well as paper products. We're not going to be able to do any kind of papers. I mean, we have to qualify it, but today we're using some of the tag stock papers, as well as very thin papers, for example, like a 40-pound papers.
Okay. And then this one says, which is better to apply with folding carton, dry inlay or wet inlay?
You're talking about inserting directly into folding carton, or?
Yeah.
Yeah, so there are some the partners of ours actually looking into that. So typically, that process is done by wet inlays. So the easiest way to get into the folding carton process in introducing RFID inlay is having high-speed label applicator can handle RFID inlay. So during the folding carton process, you're just applying wet inlays, either at the joint or inside the carton. Then that's probably the easiest way to enable the folding cartons with RFID.
Mm-hmm. And this one's interesting for our label and tag converters, because this is a topic that's a hot topic. How does the inlay impact the recyclability of the finished label or tag?
Well, that's a fantastic question. So one of the motivations that we had in terms of doing SmartFace, obviously SmartFace does improve the overall efficiency standpoint, not just for us, but as well at the end of the day, for the end customers, from the how many layers of products are going in. But it's more sustainable solution. So now we are cutting down on polyester products, polyester materials within the RFID product. So SmartFace material does give you the advantage in terms of sustainability solutions. When it comes to recyclability of RFID products, I mean, that's one of the most common questions that we get from time to time. We could break down the antenna materials, and the antenna material that we're using is not is potentially recyclable. So it's a conversation that we need to have with the end customers and the label converters in terms of recyclability, how our product can impact the recycling stream. But we are looking into that by introducing SmartFace products.
Okay, and here's another good question. This person says converting RFIDs is one part, but data management is another important part. Do you have any experience with that?
No, that's absolutely correct. So, I mean, when I mentioned one of the key factors being successful in this market is network of partners. So, from our standpoint, we are inlay manufacturers, and we work very closely with the label converters to customize our products to better fit for end-use applications. But in terms of the data management software, hardwares, that is a very, very important factor. So we work with a lot of different the channel partners or our partners who's playing in that field from the system integration standpoint, as well as the hardware and the software. So we could always make the right recommendation depending on what your projects or what your application you're looking at to bring in the right partners to be successful for that application.
Okay. And then last question, because we're right at that hour mark. This person is wondering about applying RFID technology to already die-cut labels in the reels. They say for label manufacturers who don't want to convert their press lines but use separate RFID converting line.
Yeah, so a couple options that come to me is AB Graphic, ABG, as well as Schober has a very simple press. It's actually very smart. I mean, it's a very a very concise, very simple the web handling machine that takes die-cut wet inlays from inlay manufacturers and take die-cut finished labels, and there is a way you could marry those two together. So it delaminates the label for split seconds, and the inlay gets inserted in between, and the label comes back down. So the two folks that I can think of is AB Graphic and the Schober, who has that solution. But there are some limitations when you're doing that. So, for example, if the label material is perfed, then you're going to have a little bit of difficult time. If you have to do any kind of customization downstream, you're not going to be able to do that. But if you're just simply looking for RFID insertion into die-cut labels, Schober and AB Graphic has a very delicate, very simple, relatively simple solution for that.
Okay, great. Well, that brings us right up to that hour mark. So thank you both, Jeremy and DJ, for your time today. Really appreciate it. It was a very informative webinar.
Can I make one quick comment before we go?
Yeah.
I forgot to put our contact info, but best way to contact us is email address rfid.info@averydennison.com. And of course, you can get to us through our website, rfid.averydennison.com.
And that's a great segue too. I just wanted to remind listeners there's a few questions about if they could see this after, maybe they missed a few parts in the beginning. So this webinar will be at labelsandlabeling.com under our video section of the website later today, and it'll be available to view after that. So, and that concludes our webinar. We would ask those still